Hi there. The Church of Nowhere doesn't have any clergy, as I've said before, but I think it does have, or could have, its fair share of prophets. And one of them, of course, is Danny Shine from Social Experimentalist. Actually, I prefer to use the word revealer rather than prophet, because a prophet has a rather somewhat technical connotation within the Torah, and not all the characters in the Torah could be said to be prophets, although a lot of them were. Some of them were judges and things like that. So, prophet is normally prophesying, as far as the Torah is concerned, that something bad will happen to Israel if the Israelites don't behave themselves and don't adhere to the requirements of Judaism. That's mostly what their message was, but of course, other things as well. Um, so I prefer the term revealer. And Danny Shine, I suppose, is at the moment the best example of a revealer for the Church of Nowhere or the Church of Nothing, even assuming that he might admit that he is a member of this Church of Nowhere or Church of Nothing, because pretty much everybody is a member of this church, whether they know it or not, or potentially so anyway. So Danny Shine from Social Experimentalist, one of the revealers of the Church of Nowhere, and he reveals certain things when he takes his megaphone and goes out into the streets to proselytize and to evangelize, because let's face it, that's what he actually is doing. And he's trying to persuade people, reveal to people the ethical problems associated with eating meat, for example, with unbridled consumerism, with support for certain institutions in Britain or in the world that are unethical in the way that they work and what they represent. He reveals to people that the royal family are basically just a lot of criminals who have become acceptable through generations. They started off life being criminals, the royal family, and now they become a sort of acceptable institution and even a way of selling products and services abroad for Britain, which is perhaps their only positive attribute in actual fact, although some would argue that's a very important one. Anyway, so he's anti-commercial, anti-consumerist, certainly, and anti-meat eating. And he goes out and he reveals to people his feelings about consumerism and meat eating and consumption of dairy products, which of course support the meat industry. So he does a great job, and he's been doing it for about 10 years now, and he's become somewhat of a London institution. He also reveals what a disturbing fact, which he's revealed for a very long time, that in modern British cities now there is a great deal of land where ordinary people, meet up with each other or accumulate or conglomerate or whatever. Accumulate anyway. I can't remember what the word is. Anyway, they're all gathered together in certain parts of the land of London, for example, which is privately owned, and that means that an individual or group of individuals, if they say something that the owner of this piece of private land doesn't agree with, or any of his or her representatives doesn't agree with, they can ask you to leave, as if it was your own house, and somebody started saying stuff that you didn't like, you could ask them to leave your property. But unfortunately, where this public property, or where this private property rather, meets with public property, and where people are gathered together for the purposes of commerce or entertainment or whatever, and they might wish to hear individual opinion or protest against something or other. They can actually, well, the right of the individual to do this is actually curtailed by the fact that it is private property on which they are protesting or which they are expressing their opinion, either with megaphone or not with megaphone. So he reveals this rather disturbing sort of loss of free speech in Britain as British land or British city land becomes more and more privatised, which in fact always was the case in the 17th century because corporations, town and city corporations were totally private, even to the extent of having factory shops, so that the shops were owned by the factory. And but certainly there was very little state. Well, if it was crown-owned land, of course you couldn't express your opinion on land owned by the crown either. So democracy was limited in the 17th century, and it looks like it's going back to being just as limited now in the 21st century, which is somewhat disturbing, but which is possible because, things don't have to keep on getting better or more democratic. They can get less democratic as the decades go by. So things can go down as well as up, which you should be aware of anyway. Democracy is a very fragile thing. And the other thing that Danny Shine reveals, which is very important, is that if you were thinking of taking up your megaphone and going out and proselytizing for the Church of Nowhere, you've also got to be very prepared to deal with hecklers and detractors and people that think that you are bullying the poor general public, and that you are causing a nuisance and disturbing the peace, and that you deserve to be beaten up or had water poured over you or something like that. And you've got to know how to deal non-violently with these detractors, with your critics, because of course non-violence is at the heart of the Church of Nowhere and Church of Nothing. Obviously, since it promotes veganism, it must have non-violence at its very core. So you have to know how to deal with criticism in a non-violent way, in a democratic way, and preserve the democratic rights of those who are criticising you as well as those who are supporting you. But at the same time also standing up for your own democratic right to express your opinion, whether or not that causes offence. Because also he has to convince the police officers of the fact that they can't move people along for expressing their opinion. It used to be that there were laws in Britain, or public order. There was a Public Order Offence Act, which actually sort of seemed to suggest that you couldn't express an opinion publicly that might cause offence. But this has actually been removed now from Public Order Acts, Offences Act. So we don't have that. But a lot of police officers in London don't seem to have caught up with the law or the change of law, and are still trying to intimidate people on the streets of London from expressing their opinion. So Danny Shine also reveals that kind of thing going on as well. So he has an educational role to play for ordinary people of London, and he does speak to ordinary people. Sometimes he goes to the heartland of the commercial side of Britain, of the upper middle classes, and tries to proselytize amongst them. He's against alcohol, and he's against cigarettes, and he's against gambling. So he does a lot of revealing rather than prophesying. Although I suppose he does the occasional prophesying when he talks about global change, global warming, as a result of the consumption of dairy products and meat products. But certainly he does a revealing job, and he could be said to be a revealer. But also of the need to be nonviolent and of the way of controlling your emotional reactions to people that are becoming aggressive with you, trying to pick a fight with you, and what to do about that. And that's very important. So if you were thinking of becoming a revealer for the Church of Nowhere, and go out proselytizing with your megaphone, then I encourage you to watch a lot of Danny Shine's videos, because he will give you de facto training on how to go about this without causing an actual fracas or disturbance in the streets, which obviously you don't want to do, because then you'll just get yourself a reputation for real troublemaking, which will mean that wherever you go, the police will be onto you in some shape or form or in some way. So it is necessary, to not bring yourself into disrepute. You can't bring the church into disrepute because there is no actual physical church. But you can just do yourself harm, which basically obviously you should try to avoid that at all costs, and go out and have a safe and enjoyable time being a revealer for the Church of Nowhere.